temperature as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Senator Waters.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Dr Vitesi and Ms Middleton, for coming along today. Sticking with El Nino, can you explain the impact of El Nino on global temperatures?
Yes, I think something, in fact this infographic might even say it, a large number of the big jumps in global temperature are associated with El Niños. And this is because El Nino, in fact, is the largest climate influence on the whole global climate system. And what it's really all about is the turning over of heat energy from the oceans to the atmosphere. So during a La Niña, the opposite, we see a dominance of heat being subducted down into the deep ocean from the atmosphere. And we've been in a kind of a La Niña dominated phase, you might say, since 1998, which was the last big El Nino where there was a temperature spike. And the risk now is, if this El Nino continues to intensify as we do, there's a good chance, in fact, that we'll see global atmospheric temperatures start climbing much faster again, as they did prior to the last El Nino.
Okay, so another senator asked you about the impact of climate change on El Nino, and you said there was a mooted relationship. My understanding from CSIRO is that they say that climate change will double the risk of super El Ninos, so those really extreme ones, to one every 10 years. Do you share that view?
Well, that's based on outputs from model projections, so they're not observations, which is the difference I would draw. It's not to say they're invalid at all, but yeah, that's why I'm saying they're mooted. We haven't observed such changes per se, but they're projected to occur on the basis of what the models are telling us.
Okay, and your models are also telling you that same information?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so
well, we were operating with the same model base. Everything that CSIRO is talking about is effectively something that we're doing in collaboration with them, with a joint model.
Okay, so it's modelled that super El Ninos will become twice as frequent, namely once every 10 years as climate change intensifies.
We don't use the term super El Ninos. We would say that strong El Ninos are likely to be more frequent. And I can't remember the exact figure of frequency increase, but I do know that they're increasing. Yeah.
Okay, well, perhaps if you could take on notice. My understanding is
we could
to one in every 10 years, which is a doubling, but please.
Okay, yeah, we'd be happy to provide a more detailed answer
Thank
to
you.
that.
Moving now to some, in my view, very controversial and ill-informed comments from Maurice Newman, the Prime Minister's head of the Business Advisory Council. He, and I quote, in an op-ed presumably written by him, published under his name a few weeks ago, said global warming is the hook.
Senator Waters, you've probably screened a little bit close to the wind there. If you'd like to keep your comments to the facts that presumably is written by him, you're making an inference it wasn't written by him.
Oh, I'm astounded that anybody holds those views, but it purports to be an op-ed in his name.
Okay, well, I think if it purports to be an op-ed in his name, I think we can assume that he wrote it, so maybe we could start from that premise.
Which, yes.
I don't think Mr Newman contests that they are his views or that
More's
it is
the
his
pity.
op-ed.
So, thank you. So his quote was, global warming is the hook. It's about a new world order under the control of the UN. He makes other disparaging remarks about climate science in the course of that opinion piece, which I hope you've had a look at. Can you give me the Bureau's scientific perspective on that view?
Perhaps, Senator Waters, you might like to rephrase the question, and I'm sure Dr Vitesi will happily answer factual questions in relation to the Bureau's scientific work and analysis. But a sort of sweeping generalisation of can he comment on Mr Newman's op-ed, or Mr Newman is entitled to his opinion. Everybody is entitled to contest that opinion. Dr Vitesi appears at Senate estimates to answer questions on matters of fact, not on matters of opinion. And if you want to ask him questions on matters of fact, I'm sure they can be addressed.
Thank you. Well, so does the climate science support Mr Newman's views?
Well, Senator Waters, if you want to put a statement, a particular statement, and ask Dr Vitesi whether climate science, as he understands it, accords with that statement, that's fine. Let's not generalise Mr Newman's views and then seek Dr Vitessi's
Well, I can
response.
spend the next 8 minutes reading the op-ed into Hansard if you like, but I figured that would not be a good use of anybody's time.
Senator Waters, I would have hoped you might have come prepared for questions with particular comments that you might want Dr Vitessi to respond to, particular claims you might want him to respond to. Senator Waters, you haven't put a properly formed question for Senate estimates to Dr Vitessi.
Well, Dr Vitessi, I asked before, global warming is the hook. It's about a new world order under the control of the UN. Does the climate science support that global warming is simply about a new world order under the control of the UN?
Senator Waters, I'm sorry. Look, Mr Newman, used great rhetorical flourish in his op-ed, whatever the merits of the facts that are informed or not. Dr Vitessi, I don't think, is here to comment on the rhetoric of Mr Newman's arguments about whether or not this is a UN conspiracy or the like. If you want to ask him about the climate science, that's fine, but not about the UN. That's like, ask DFAT whether they think there's a conspiracy operating in the UN if you want, but not the Bureau of Meteorology.
He's not your friend, Minister.
Well,
I'm sure he's not your advisor or friend.
Look, I've met with Mr Newman. I respect his business credentials.
Okay. So let's now
If I could just resume my
Senator
questioning,
Waters.
please.
Senator Waters, pardon me.
I'm being interrupted.
Yeah,
Chair,
well, I'm the
by
chair
all
and
means.
I'm in control here.
Through the
So
chair.
what I would respectfully suggest to you is if you have a statement that of scientific fact or a science statement that Mr Newman has made, and you wish to question the validity of that statement in terms of climate science, then maybe ask it now. Otherwise, we might move on because this is not serving any purpose at all.
Thank you, Chair. Well, there are multiple statements which assert facts about climate science that I'm intrigued on the Bureau's view about, and given the invitation to do so, I shall go through them all. Starting with, it's a well-kept secret, but 95% of the climate models, we are told, prove the link between human CO2 emissions and catastrophic global warming have been found after nearly 2 decades of temperature stasis to be in error.
That is incorrect.
That is incorrect. Thank you.
Does Newman source his material? Does he?
No, there are no references in this piece. We have been subjected to extravagance from climate catastrophists for close to 50 years. Is that correct?
Depends how you define extravagance, I suspect.
I'd need something a bit more specific. I mean, that's talking about the dialogue that occurs rather than any scientific fact.
Okay, indeed. In January 1970, Life magazine, based on, quote, solid scientific evidence, claimed that by 1985 air pollution would reduce sunlight reaching the Earth by half. In fact, across that period, sunlight fell between 3% and 5%.
I'm not familiar with that work at all, but I don't think it's relevant to climate change.
Okay. Was it not of significance in determining
Not
whether
that I'm
climate
aware
change
of.
is indeed anthropogenic
There
or
is
not?
one related thing that I could talk about a little bit, and that's the so-called process of global dimming, which is the accumulation of pollutants in the atmosphere is actually reducing the amount of sunlight that's coming into Earth, which to an extent is actually suppressing the effects of global warming. And should that pollution be removed, we would expect actually an increase in the warming process.
I continue on, as the Chair's allowed me to. Fast forward to March 2000 and David Viner, Senior Research Scientist at the Climatic Research Unit, University of East Anglia, told The Independent, quote, snowfalls are now a thing of the past. In December 2010, the Mail Online reported, quote, coldest December since records began as temperatures plummet to minus 10 degrees Celsius, bringing travel chaos across Britain.
Look, I'm not familiar with that particular article, but I think it is referring to a bit of an old red herring that suggests that just because you're getting cold weather in the northern hemisphere, it somehow discredits the fact that there is global warming occurring. There is a perfectly good explanation for that. the theory of global warming does not hold that there will be no cold weather anywhere. And in fact, there's evidence to suggest that global warming will actually intensify the onset of some cold weather due to the effect of the changing behaviour of the jet stream, which wanders around a hell of a lot more latitudinally than it used to as a result to changes to the global climate system. And that has the effect of actually bringing more polar air down into some populated areas in the Northern Hemisphere, as well as bringing up some hot weather as well. So it's by no means any kind of proof that global warming is not occurring.
Okay. Weather bureaus appear to have homogenised data to suit narratives.
I reject it.
Okay. We've had our own, I'm quoting here from Maurice Newman, we've had our own busted predictions. Perhaps the most preposterous was climate alarmist Tim Flannery's 2005 observation, quote, "If the computer records are right, these drought conditions will become permanent in eastern Australia," end quote. Subsequent rainfall and severe flooding have shown the records or his analysis are wrong. We've swallowed dud prediction after dud prediction.
It's someone else's opinion, and it's a very broad canvas of ideas in that. I'm not quite sure what I could say about that, other than to say that there is already a climate change effect on the rainfall of southern Australia.
The IPCC, which we were instructed was the gold standard on global warming, has been exposed repeatedly for misrepresentation and shoddy methods.
I would reject that.
Okay. And then he goes on to the real agenda is concentrated political authority. Global warming is the hook, and the UN's apparently trying to take over the world. He then sort of goes on and on and on, so I won't continue, but thank you for clarifying that his statements were variously not correct, not relevant, an old red herring, rejected on multiple occasions. Did you offer Mr Newman a briefing on the state of climate science?
No.
Have you since?
No.
Will you be?
No.
Have you offered the Prime Minister a briefing on the state of climate science?
No, I have not.
Is that something that you might consider doing?
I think, Senator Waters, that as with all governments, Prime Ministers, their departments, ministers, their departments, members of the executive request briefings when and where they need them, that they are provided in the context of certain decision-making processes. I have no doubt that as matters would have gone through government around the construct of, for example, the highly successful Emissions Reduction Fund, that the department would have crystallised within its advice whatever information was relevant from Dr Vitesi and other arms of government in relation to climate science.
Thank you. Dr Vitesi, does the climate science support the statement that coal is good for humanity? If you're allowed to respond.
Senator Waters, once again, if you want to ask Dr Vitesi about emissions, although I would note that the Bureau of Meteorology, though expert in its field, is expert in the field of climate and weather. It is not a scientific agency like the CSIRO that goes to a range of scientific projects into the causes of climate change as much as it is a scientific agency looking at the occurrence of climate change. But if you want to try asking Dr Vitesi about causes of emissions, then again I'm sure he'd be quite happy to answer those where he can, and otherwise refer you to CSIRO or elsewhere where that's appropriate, but not to comment on rhetoric once again.
So just to be clear, Dr Vitesi is not permitted to answer the question of whether the climate science supports the statement by the Prime Minister that coal is good for humanity.
Senator Waters, you're asking Dr Vitesi for an opinion on a rhetorical statement.
Based on climate science, correct.
You're asking
as
for an
the
opinion
Bureau.
on a rhetorical statement. If you want to ask him about causes of
No,
emissions,
he really did
go
say
your
that. Our
hardest.
Prime Minister really said that.
And if you
Not
want
a
to ask
rhetorical
Dr
statement
Vitesi
at all.
about causes of emissions, go your hardest. Dr. Senator Waters.
Is there anything you feel you are able to contribute?
What I can say is that the primary cause of global warming is the emission of CO2, and the primary reason CO2 emissions are increasing is from the burning of fossil fuels. Coal is a fossil fuel.
Thank you. I think that's fairly self-evident to many of us, apparently not to the Prime Minister, but thank you for your clarity. Can I move now and just moving back to some questions that Senator Singh was asking about staffing. Just so I'm clear on the figures, you said that there were 117 folk as at 30 June 2013 that worked on climate issues as opposed to climate change, and that there were currently now 101 and a half working on climate issues. So that's 15 and a half equivalent people that have been reduced, which is about 13%. What work on climate issues is now not being done as a result of that 13% reduction in staffing?
Number 6. As I mentioned earlier, the 3 of the 10 functions that are listed in that table are climate change research, climate variability research, and the development of climate models. So all these things are going on in our research branch, basically.
Sorry, were you saying though that's the work that's now not happening, or that's the work
No, it
that
is happening. It's been reduced. The overall
Okay.
effort has been reduced by, it looks like about 15 people.
Okay, so the reductions have been in climate research, climate variability research and climate models.
That's
Okay,
correct, yeah.
Thank you. And can you just explain for me what is the distinction that you make between climate issues and climate change? How
Yep.
could you just
Sure.
tell me what those categories are?
Okay, so let me talk about all of the stuff we were talking about earlier with El Nino, for instance, which is tracking the state of the Pacific Ocean and the pressure systems around the country, looking at the impacts that that is having on rainfall and temperature is based on our observations. That's a whole lot of what you might just call climate analysis and climate forecasting that has got nothing to do with climate change science at all. Likewise, all of the work that we do on climate statistics that we provide for farmers and people in the energy industry, etc., you know, telling them what the distribution of solar energy is across the country, or the distribution of soil moisture might be for different seasons and so on. These are, again, general climate analysis activities that are very important to a lot of stakeholders, but they have nothing to do with climate change.
Okay, and so just going back to those figures, so you've got 9 people as at 23rd of February 2015 working on climate change as opposed to those broader climate issues that you've just talked through.
That's specifically for climate change research.
Climate change research.
If there's another area of climate change which is more in the operational services area, there was 2 people working on that on the 30th of June 2013. There are now 3 people working on that today.
Okay, so you've got, now 3, so you've got 12 people currently working on what you'd call climate change as opposed to climate
dominantly
issues.
on climate change work,
13.
yes.
Okay, and you said you've got 100...
sorry, could I just hold you back there for a minute? You really, if we could maybe give you a copy of this table that we prepared, there would be work that is undertaken currently in the development of climate models. 12 people working on the climate models, that is climate change related. Probably the distinction I would draw is one group is looking at building the models, another group is looking at understanding the processes. So there's subtle nuances, but if you really wanted to know how many people were working on climate change related things in the organisation, I'm hazarding to guess it's probably of the order of 30 or so.
Okay, and pardon me, you've just confused me a bit. So we've done the figures for climate research and for operational services, and that was 12. You said there's about an extra 12 on climate models, but then you've said there's about 30 How do you get to the 30?
All right. Well, again, I'd draw reference to this detail table
Yeah.
that we've provided to a question on notice. If you'd like, I can read out all of the individual
Oh, look,
functions.
I'll go and look that up. What was the number of that one? I will check that.
65 is our reference.
Yeah, SQ15. Oh, is it? Sorry.
We'll get you the reference
All right,
number.
thank you. That will help because we do get a lot of useful quants back.
Yep.
Okay, so that's 12, possibly 24, possibly around 30 out of 1,669 staff. Is that a sort of traditional proportion of climate change work?
Traditional in what sense compared to
Well,
other
as sort of
meteorological
along the lines that
agencies?
Senator Singh was asking before, is that diminished significantly or increased, or is it about the same?
Well, I think I explained earlier that it has decreased by about 15 or 16 people since June 2013, yes. Yep.
Okay, and that wasn't, I'm trying to remember what you said, that wasn't deliberate by the Bureau,
No,
but more
there
possibly an effect
there
of
is
the-
no intent within the Bureau of
Yeah.
Meteorology to reduce the amount of climate change activity. The reductions that have occurred reflect really changes in the availability of external funding which sustain that activity. And that has diminished. And it's not just from the federal government, it's also from state governments and others.
Well, thank you. I want to go to that now. You mentioned that you've got some external funding from defence, from state governments and also from offshore oil and gas.
Yep.
Can you tell me about your offshore oil and gas work and how many staff have you got through that capital program working on offshore oil and gas?
Yes. I'll might throw to Dr. Canterford on that.
Yeah, Ray Canterford. We do have some figures here. I have an approximate number of about 30, but I would need to just check our table. If you just like to hold for a moment.
Okay, thank you. So it's about the same amount of people doing climate change work as doing offshore oil and gas?
Let me just confirm the number first.
Interesting.
Yeah, I was going to say, Senator, in terms of our external revenue, in the last financial year, so 13-14, we generated about $74 million worth of revenue. So in terms of headcount, that equated to roughly 300 staff at one time or another during the course of that financial year were actively engaged in delivering services that were funded from the private sector. We provide about $6 million worth of commercial weather services to the offshore oil and gas industry, about $6 million. And those are bespoke services where the oil and gas industry is looking for additional services beyond what we traditionally provide to the public, so beyond what we're appropriated to provide, specifically around early warnings around tropical cyclones and other events that affect their production. So they're quite specific services where the industry actually defines the parameters and the nature of the service that they want, and they pay to have dedicated forecasters available to provide that service to them.
Okay. So any other examples of the nature of the work performed for the offshore oil and gas industry beyond just the clearly very useful predictions of tropical cyclones?
Yeah, predominantly it's in the tropical cyclone space.
Okay. Is
There'd
there
be some
anything else you
seastate,
can mention?
Yeah, there is.
Ray Canterford. They do other work, for instance, for in terms of sea state and swell, etc., for loading and unloading in harbours. But essentially, it is very much a occupational health and a safety issue for staff on those rigs to enable them to be evacuated before a serious event. So it is very much an operational service that is funded by the offshore oil and gas industry, and these staff work alongside our normal appropriated funded staff.
Okay, so that's a focus on safety. Is there any production relevant work?
Sorry, Senator?
You mentioned that that assistance is essentially for safety, and no one would dispute the need for that. Is there any additional work or any relevance to the production ability of those sectors as a result of your advice?
I'm sure that that type of information services we provide would assist, but in terms of I wouldn't have the knowledge of the production capabilities myself. We provide a service under contract.
Well,
we do have, sorry, Senator, I was just going to say, we do have, of course, other specific cost recovered funding that's we receive from the aviation industry for operation of aircraft, safe operation of aircraft, and also from the Department of Defence for assistance to them as well. These are long-standing arrangements we have with both those industries. And
well, thanks for responding to the best of your ability. Could you take on notice, perhaps, your awareness or anyone in the Bureau's awareness of any effect on production capacity for offshore oil and gas as a result of the Bureau's advice?
Senator, I might just clarify that. In our discussions when we provide a customised or a bespoke service to the offshore oil and gas industry, they essentially advise us of the information they need, and we provide them with a quote for what it will cost in addition to our normal public forecasting to produce that information for them. We're not actually privy to the decision making that the offshore oil and gas industry takes. So, we wouldn't be in a position within the Bureau, nor would we withhold that, hold that information that says what impact decisions on when they make decisions around offshore oil and gas rig evacuation in a cyclone event. We wouldn't have that information within the Bureau. That would be a question to ask the offshore oil and gas industry.
Okay, so how do you know it's all relevant for safety?
They basically have given us, these are key thresholds for us in which we need forecasts, and so we respond to those. We're not actually privy to their decision making.
And you just assume it's safety related?
Yep. That's what they've advised us.
Okay.
But it's very general.
That's what they've advised you?
Yeah,
or
they've just said
assume?
Because in terms of how they operationalise their plans in severe weather or extreme weather, they have time thresholds, so they've indicated to us when it is useful for them to have particular forecasts available to them of particular weather phenomenon, so wind speeds, wave heights, those sort of things, so they can activate their operational plans. Why they have those thresholds, we're not privy to that information.
Okay, look, thank you for that. And just a final few questions on a different topic. There was a program called Environmental Information Program, which my understanding was BOM was in charge of, which I think expired last year. Do you know if anyone is doing that work now?
No, it hasn't expired. It became an ongoing measure for the Bureau. This is
is that right?
Yeah,
okay, can you tell me more about that?
Yes, I can. So it's a small program. It resides within our Environment and Research division, and it's undertaking a few things. It's the home of our so-called e-reefs activity that I believe you asked us about before.
Yep.
So there we are working with the Great Barrier Reef Foundation and Queensland Government and AIMS and the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Authority and CSIRO to build a series of, basically a suite of different technologies that can help to more sensitively manage the Great Barrier Reef. And through that environmental information program, we've put together one operational product, and that's the Marine Water Quality Dashboard, which basically takes remote sensing data from satellites and produces maps of water quality in the Great Barrier Reef Lagoon each day. So you can go onto the Bureau's website now and every day see an updated map of what the water quality conditions are. So that's been one of the products that we've produced under the program. We are now working on a receiving water quality, a hydrodynamic model, I should say, rather, for the Great Barrier Reef, so we can actually forecast what the circulation patterns will be in the Great Barrier Reef Lagoon to forecast those 7 days ahead. So that is work that is ongoing. In other areas of the Environmental Information Program, we've been looking at things like developing data sharing standards and policies and working with federal agencies to understand their environmental information needs, I suppose, and developing those data sharing technologies. So there are a few examples of the things that are underway.
Great, thank you. Can you just clarify the funding situation? So there was 18 million for BOM over 4 years, which that funding came to an end in 13-14. You say it's now an ongoing program. Does that mean that you don't have any specific money dedicated to it?
Oh, no, there was an ongoing measure.
Okay,
So,
how much, what's
yeah.
the quantum of that?
From memory, sorry?
I'd say it's about a third of that, so it's in the order of 3 to 4.
Yeah, I think it's running at about $3 to $4 million per year.
Okay.
There's a little bit of extra money in the original measure to do some capital builds of some
Okay.
data infrastructure.
Okay, so it's
we can
essentially being
give you the
maintained at
precise
same level.
figure as
Yeah,
a
thank you.
question on notice.
And can you tell me how much funding and staff time is currently allocated to consolidating environmental information on a continental scale, especially as regards biodiversity?
Oh, look, it's pretty small. I'd have to look into that and we could give you a detailed answer.
Yeah, thank you. I'd appreciate that, specifically if there's anyone dedicated to that or if it's just a responsibility shared amongst a few folk and what resourcing they've got available to them.
I can certainly clarify one thing. We are not in the process of gathering, collating environmental information for the continent. We're focused more on more on the standards and the technologies for doing it, such that other people can work together in what you might call a federated system where we're all doing our own bit and able to share one another's data.
Great. Well, look, thank you for your assistance today.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Senator Ward.